Welcome to Atheists Talk. I'm Grant Steves, your host for this program on the journey from faith to reason. My guests are Keith Luttemeyer, Ryan Sutter, and James Zimmerman, and I want to welcome you to the program this evening. Before we start our program, I would like each of the guests to give a brief statement of their background in terms of their relationship to religion and their context at this point. So we'll start with Keith, please.
Well, I'm an atheist now. I have a real mild background in religion. My parents are divorced, and my only exposure to religion was when I would visit my father, and we would go to church every other weekend. And it was just enough to immunize me.
Ryan?
4 years ago, I left the Jehovah's Witnesses. I had been born into a family of Jehovah's Witnesses and raised that way. Currently I'm an atheist.
And James?
And like Ryan, I was also born to Jehovah's Witnesses parents who had also been raised as witnesses. And for the first 25 years of my life, I would eat, sleep, and breathe that religion.
Okay. This has been a two-part program in which we first discussed the issue of faith and belief and how it is part of the culture today and how we define it in different ways, both personally and institutionally. But there is a journey for many people which goes from the faith part of it, the trust in the Word of God or belief in God, and you begin to question, and that's the process of the reason that enters in. And so in the second part of this program, we're going to be discussing the reason part of how you change your mind about your religion or your faith or your beliefs. It is interesting to note that in terms of reason itself, reason is a process for me of gathering evidence and then drawing conclusions from it. And when you do that, that process can change your mind. However, if you started out with assumptions, as we discussed in the faith issue, of believing that there is a God and believing that the Bible is the Word of God, the evidence and the assumptions drive you in a different direction. So I would like to start out by asking my panelists if there was a loss of faith or belief, which came first? This faith issue, which is much more emotional in nature in some ways, than the belief issue. And let's start with James.
For me, it was definitely a loss of belief that came first. I came to have a fear of finding out more, even though the Watchtower Society, which sets the doctrine for Jehovah's Witnesses, they encouraged doing research and personal study. But in time, I became afraid of looking up their sources because I discovered they took things out of context. There were doctrinal flip-flops, and there were things that really stretched what logic could handle. So that, coupled with a fear of being shunned by everyone that I ever knew and loved, meant that my faith, my desire to stay in it, lasted a lot longer than my belief in it.
Okay. Ryan?
For me, my faith was shattered by having certain beliefs disproven. A real core one was I believed that Noah's flood happened 4,000 years ago, which sounds kind of embarrassing to say today, but that's what I was taught, and that was what I believed. And when I was shown logically and reasonably why that was not possible and couldn't deny that logic and reason, then it caused me for the first time to really wonder if I could trust anything else that was in the Bible or anything that was told me by the Watchtower Society. And so then I started a process of trying to discover what level of trust I could have, and that wiped out faith.
Okay.
It's hard for me to really say that I had faith. It was a faux faith. At most, it was shallow. So I would really have to say that I lost my belief first because I didn't really have faith. It was just always, my experience was at a church, and it was uncomfortable, and that was basically the extent of my experience with religion.
Well, it's interesting that the fear issue, which we had talked about during the program about faith, continues to enter in here. It is also interesting to me that when we look at it, we're looking at a change in attitude, perception of evidence in the terms of the reasoning that goes on. that suddenly, as Ryan said, you looked at a particular issue that is brought out in the Bible, Noah's Ark. Is this the truth? Is this a valid point? And you're not questioning the existence of God here. You're not even questioning the Bible as the story of Noah's Ark. You just simply wanted to know what happened. And you explored it. And could you tell me some of the elements that went into that exploration?
Well, to try to be as brief to respond to that as I can, it just started with having a more general question of how animals could survive, how ecosystems could survive without animals eating other animals, which the witnesses say is how the paradise was and how it would be again after Armageddon. And I couldn't shake the fact that ecosystems could not function that way. And I talked to my wife about it, who's also a witness, and I spoke to James about it, actually. And James said, well, we think that's, I've looked into that, and I think that's symbolic. And then he also sent me a link. He also said, and also, I've looked into Noah's flood, and I believe Noah's flood is also not a global flood. It was a local flood. And what he didn't know, though, was that when I looked into that, the next step that my mind took was, it wasn't so much that the flood was wrong. It was the way that the apologetics were structured to try to convince you that it was right, I knew was dishonest. Now, when I suddenly saw dishonesty, I said, oh, and that's where faith got beaten up, because I had trusted that the Watchtower Society used honesty when they presented information to me. When I discovered they didn't, that's where that happened. But the belief, you know, it was kind of like, well, if they were wrong about it, it wasn't a big deal, but it was that they were wrong about it and then were basically lying to say they were correct about it. That lost the trust.
That's where the trust fell. And that was one of the points, that faith is trust or assurance, and that was definitely undermined in that case. You had this. You were one of the prompters on the Noah's issue.
Yeah, because I was feeling discouraged and depressed in the religion at a particular point in my life, and I even felt kind of guilty because I would go to the witnesses' meetings and be bored because I had read everything that they published, and I felt, you know, what else is there, you know, but I wanted to keep in it. And one of the traveling representatives of the Watchtower Society paid a visit to our congregation, and he suggested that for people who maybe feel like they're bored with the religion, that he said, try to become an expert, try to learn everything you can about one subject in the Bible. And before I could even think of a subject, he suggested Noah's flood. So I did, along with my wife, we tried to learn absolutely everything there was. And in time, we became very knowledgeable about it. One of the elders in the congregation even patted me on the back one day, saying he was glad I was in his congregation to help answer some of the tougher questions about the geology and the biology relating to Noah's flood. And I guess that's what caused me to lose my faith in the organization, because while there were other things that I doubted, that one particular thing I had actually even written to the Watchtower Society about with questions, because I realized they had contradictions in what they said. When it was convenient, there was a water canopy before the flood. When it was convenient, there was not a water canopy before the flood. I tried suggesting to the Watchtower Society that maybe it wasn't a global flood, but maybe a local one, and they wouldn't go for that. In fact, in their most recent letter to me from a few years ago, they said, we suggest that you let the matter rest. And I wrote back to them saying that that's anathema to everything that they had taught me for 30 years, because I pointed out in their August 1st, 2001 Watchtower, they said, when it comes to religion, mistaken beliefs have historically caused great harm. And in their December 1st, 2006 Watchtower, they said, if you have not already done so, make it your aim to acquire accurate knowledge. And I pointed out that in their August 1st, 2001 Watchtower, they said, since God has given us intellectual capacity to investigate the world and to ask questions concerning spiritual matters, does it not make sense that he would also provide the means to get answers to our questions? They never wrote back to that letter.
So God made you an atheist.
Or at the very least, his channel here on earth, the Watchtower Society.
Well, Keith didn't have a channel that was directing him any place. You had doubts. You said you were motivated in some respects by the fear of hellfire. Did you put any fires out on and Did that help you in terms of
Through reason, did I put in? Well, you're right about children, I think, are little fundamentalists. I don't think at a certain age children can really understand metaphorical language. So when you tell them something, they're going to burn in eternity, or burn eternally, they really believe it. And that is terrifying. I've always had doubts, so it was mitigated by my doubts, but I was still pretty terrified. But essentially it was a cultural thing with me. I went to church with my father and left it when I left church.
The interesting part to me in listening to the three of you is that it's a transition from looking at things rather literally, that maybe if you had viewed this metaphorically, as some religions do today, some Christian churches view Noah's Ark and the Genesis account of Adam and Eve in a metaphor sense, that it might have been more difficult to bring you to where you are today.
I think that's absolutely true. I think that apologetics, creationism, those things are their own worst enemy, because they give the appearance of reasonability, but in reality they're just fraught with dishonesty, and so they're like landmines just waiting for somebody like like us to step on them, you know, and discover that, you know, because the one thing that I did maintain even after I left my Christian upbringing, I still believed in honesty, integrity, being willing to stand up for your principles, and my principles didn't really change. It was I believe that it's wrong to lie, and so what's strange is those very principles that I thought I was getting from this organization stuck with me, even though that's gone.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, there's an amusing parallel between what people go through and what justices of the Supreme Court go through when they're looking at the Constitution. We have different approaches to the interpretation of the Constitution. One is a literalist approach, which is fundamentalist in nature, that you have to go back and you have to discern the true meaning of the Constitution at the time that it was created. We had a recent decision about guns. They didn't say that the guns that would be legal were only muskets, because that's what existed at the time. They're not that literal. They have to have a little movement here. So you began to have a difference. You began to think, which is the other form of constitutional law, you began to think of it as a living document. So today, many people are looking at the Bible not in the literal sense, but, oh, it's a ongoing, it's a revelation. It is a living, breathing document of myths. And therefore, we can erase what we don't like. And so we're seeing it more recently. I've never understood how people that are against, that are for homosexuality, and they look at the Bible and they look at the scriptures that refer to it and they say, well, that's misinterpretation, that's mistranslation. And they're doing the same thing as the people who are looking at Genesis and saying, Genesis is just a myth. They try to cherry pick their myths now, and not just scriptures. So we are going through a transition in society as well as individually about, and how reason has played a role in making us look at the Bible in a very, very different way, from literalism to a much more mythological, and eventually, who knows, we may look at the Bible as the Iliad and the Odyssey of Christianity. So we've looked at some of the key challenges that came through with Noah's Ark, which undermine, and almost invariably there's, to me, a point at which reason and evidence undermines that point of faith. And you begin to have the doubt that we've been discussing. In the process of going through this, did you notice what are called the stages of grief? Have you been able to assess this in that you have a loss and now you've gone through stages where there is grief even?
I think I went straight to acceptance. It was like a relief to be done with it at one point. I mean, it was a little bit frightening to let go of a belief that's pretty fundamental. Like I've said before, it's intuitive to believe there's an afterlife and a creator. And to let go of that was pretty frightening, but to let go of a belief or a faith in Jesus was like, oh, it feels good now. I'm done with that.
Santa Claus doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Okay.
For me, there was a lot of fear involved in coming out to my family, telling them, and fear of the loss that I was about to endure. I mean, I knew very, very much that I would never see any of my friends again unless they also left. I would never see my family again unless they left. And so there was a very real fear of that. But in terms of the thing that was more surprising to me, though, as far as the stages of grief, was I did find that in a lot of ways I mourned over my previous life as a witness over the course of the next few years. I was comfortable with not believing, but I think of myself, I still do think of myself as that guy and the person I am today, and I almost actually sometimes I can't even remember being that person. So it's strange. It's almost like dying in one life and having a whole other life and mourning yourself.
Being born again, atheist.
It is. It's strange. I don't know any. I think it's a great analogy for what you go through, at least for what I went through.
James?
Yeah, I had the denial definitely, because from the time my brain thought for a brief second it's not true, until the words "it's not true" came out of my mouth, over 6 years went by, even though during that time I suffered greatly, and I saw family members suffer far greater than I ever did, because of being witnesses, I mean. And then even when my wife had great anxiety and depression, largely as a result of the religion, I still wouldn't accept it. So the denial went on for a long time. And then another stage is anger. And that definitely came about because I was angry at the Watchtower Society for not admitting their errors and for covering up past mistakes. I was angry at seeing my friends and family being duped into a belief system that had no basis in reality. And then I was angry that my family and friends would shun me, and then I was angry when they did shun me. In fact, one friend said, in an email, she said to us, "I just want you to know that as long as you still believe that the Watchtower Society is the truth, then I'm here to help and or support you in any way I can." And that came from one of the most intelligent women that I know, I would say. So the anger comes from knowing that these are intelligent, reasonable people, but you get mad because they shut you down as soon as you say anything that threatens their belief system. And then it's self-perpetuating because the Watchtower Society tells its members, look at how angry the people are who leave. Look at how mad. You can see that Satan's inside them and filling them. So they demonize you literally and figuratively because they're saying, well, I don't want to leave the religion because I'll just be filled with anger and hate like you are. Right. Don't defend yourself. So,
Sure.
And I'd make a distinction on the anger and acceptance. I think that at first I was angry about having personally been duped or having personally been wrong. I felt foolish. But I came to acceptance of that pretty quickly. It's very difficult to accept ongoing things that are still going on, like being shunned and being treated wrong, or the same feeling that James has about looking at my family and going, oh, they're intelligent, they're kind, they're good people, and they're trapped in this thing, and they can't see it. And then, so the anger, those two stages, I haven't come to the acceptance on that, and I don't know that I probably will as long as that's the situation, but I kind of make a distinction there between anger versus what's happened to other people I know versus myself.
And if I can go on, it's tough to find closure because, as I have said in conversations to my wife, if you compare it to a job, you can have good closure. Well, you're either fired or you quit. That's how a job ends. And you can have good closure by quitting. You honorably give them a written letter saying, here's my 2 weeks notice, your friends take you out to eat one last time, they maybe give you a letter of recommendation, and then if you bump into those coworkers, they're like, hey, how you doing at the new job? Put in a good word for me. So you can have closure with leaving a job. But with the Jehovah's Witnesses, you can only leave in one of two ways. Either you're disfellowshipped, essentially meaning they fire you and then they all shun you, or you're disassociated, meaning you give them a letter. But it's not like giving a letter to a company because that's essentially the same thing because they'll still shun you. So you never really get to explain it or have closure.
Right.
Not fully anyway.
And one of the interesting points that I gather from this is that people in the audience that are listening to this might say, well, I'm not a Jehovah's Witness, I'm a Baptist, or I'm a fundamentalist, a Pentecostal, or non-denominational, as some of these groups refer to themselves. And this doesn't apply to me. But in reality, it does apply to you, because although you believe that Jehovah's Witnesses are a cult, and you believe that therefore they were deceived to begin with, you have to rethink about your own doubts and the fact that you too may be deceived because of the belief structure that you have created through faith in a book and in a God that perhaps isn't serving your best needs at this time. So we go through these stages of denial and this grief and this anger, and I've seen this in many people who have left cults or religions and denominations, as I think of them all, in fact, as cults, that many of them, and the more faith they had, as you did, the more belief they had, and the more that their life was grounded in their religion, I think the more anger you tend to carry with you. If you're like Keith, who had less anger, far less anger carried through, which is to your health, much healthier attitude in the long run. Well, the transition in this area then is to look at how the emotions have changed toward your religion, and you've already brought out how you are angry toward your religion to some extent, though maybe as you distance yourself that becomes somewhat less.
A little short anecdote.
Sure.
At my brother died 3 years ago, and I was already out of the religion at the time, and at his funeral I was shunned by other people who were there. And I was sitting outside with some friends of mine who were also in the same position. We were all at the funeral, but we were all being shunned. And I honestly believe this. I told them, I said, you know, the people in there love us. They've just been instructed in a strange way to show it. And that's the attitude that I try to cultivate towards my previous religion, is that instead of the anger, to me, the antidote to that is to remember that they're properly motivated by what they think are good motives, but their fundamental beliefs being founded on something other than reason lead them to do the wrong thing.
Okay, sure. Yes, I think that's one way of approaching this separation problem and the emotions that go with it. It also changes your fundamental attitude towards evidence and reason to me, that when you had faith and you had a belief, you perceive these things as fundamental to the very person that you are, your personal convictions. But now you have moved yourself out of that sphere, and you're now in an area of evidence and reasoning that is quite different. How do you view evidence and reasoning today as part of your person and your beliefs?
Well, I really don't think it has changed me. I don't go to the grocery store and conduct experiments on which laundry detergent is the best value. So, I mean, it's changed the way I think about religion and literature. I'm an English major, and the Bible appeals to me from a literary standpoint, but the reasoning part doesn't really affect me in my day-to-day life. It's I'm just as irrational as I ever was.
Okay.
I just don't filter anymore.
You don't filter?
No, I now will read as much as I can on any subject and absorb it all, and if there are contradictory opinions, I'll look at the evidence on all sides.
Okay.
Yeah, it's nice to not have to put blinders on anymore. I did that almost literally when I was in college, because there was an area of the library I like to sit in to study in between classes. But by going in there, I had to walk past an evolution display, a diorama of skulls and a history of mankind. And so I would look, the other way at the, at the Shakespeare shelves instead of the evolution shelves, because that was so huge to have to admit that was true, that I just couldn't handle it. So it's nice to, walk into a library and not have to worry that something might topple my beliefs. In fact, I'd welcome it. If something is a challenge to a personal, political, or belief that I have right now, it's nice to have a challenge, because it's cool to change your mind sometimes.
Okay. To me, it's a transition to almost a scientific attitude, where you set it up as a problem that you need to solve, and that you're open to the evidence as you encounter it not necessarily as an experiment, but as you move through the issue that you're looking at. Do I want to resolve this issue in this way or this way, and what happens to be the evidence? And that you make up your mind at the end of it rather than starting with a preconceived notion which colors all of the evidence. So, for example, as a faith person, I start out with the assumption that God exists. That's going to change all the evidence that I look at. So I remember taking a class in biology in college, and I had to give a report on evolution. And I said, this is a lot of nonsense because I believe in God. And the professor said, well, you'll change your mind someday. Right. He was right, I was wrong. But we grow. But it wasn't being able to look at that and accept it as evidence without that filter system. You take the filter system off, and it really changes it. It changes it for those, I was an English major, it changes us in terms of looking at literature. So you look at the story of Noah, and suddenly you also look at the epic of Gilgamesh, and you say, interesting piece of literature.
Definitely. That's a big reason that I was motivated to actually read the Bible. I wanted to see, what if it's all metaphorical, then what does it mean as humans? What does it say about humans psychologically, anthropologically? And essentially, yeah, that saved me, Grant.
Okay. Well, we're getting close to the end of this, and I wanted to ask people, the individuals that participated in this panel, if there were books or people or something that stimulated your change in attitude, that people could point to, that might help you. What book or item that you could recommend?
Well, two that I brought with me. The Trouble with Christmas, first of all. This one was actually recommended to me by the Watchtower Society, again, proving that they're their own worst enemy. The first half really does a good job of pointing out why. That's it, I guess.
Quickly?
Talkorigins.org website.
Okay.
Read the Bible.
Read the Bible, okay. Well, I want to thank you again, and this hour of time has gone by rather rapidly. I always recommend get a book on thinking, get a book on being certain, for example, that will help you to understand that there is a real difference between basing your life on reason and evidence and not just on faith and the assumptions that that's what happens to be there. Well, if you're interested in atheists, please contact Atheists Talk, and the address and the phone number are on the screen, and we will send you a free edition of our Minnesota Atheist newsletter. If you also want to suggest topics, we certainly would enjoy exploring other topics. If you're interested in us, we're interested in you. And thank you, and I want to thank my guests.
Thank you.